over 15 years, Kim Volpni has been a passionate promoter of pelvic health and uses fitness and movement to help women prevent and overcome challenges such as incontinence, organ prolapse, and chronic back pain. Kim helps women get to the root cause of many of the common issues that so many of us experience, which in my opinion is always the best place to start. So Kim, I'm so glad to be able to chat with you here today. And these are such important topics that I think we all need to shed some light on.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on and giving me an opportunity to share. Thank you.
So, these topics are, not often discussed among women. And I would suggest for the most part, it's because they're embarrassing topics to talk about. I'm sure, there's some women that don't even know what a pelvic floor is. So let's start there. I think explain what the pelvic floor is and how it impacts our health and our fitness and overall well-being.
Yeah, it's always the best place to start. And it is, as you say, it's something that we're never told about. We don't have any education about it. And it's typically not until something is not working as optimally as it could that we start to pay attention or realize that it is important. And so I think that if we had education when we were younger, when we're learning about menstrual health and sexual wellness at school, that would be a great opportunity to introduce this really important group of muscles. So the pelvic floor is a group of muscles. It's not just one, and it has a lot of important jobs. So it's essentially the muscles that form the base of our pelvis. If you can find 4 points on your body as your pelvis, as your pubic joint at the front. So people usually call it the pubic bone. At the back, we have a tailbone at the end of our spine. And then if you ever sit on a hard surface chair, and if you pull the flesh of your butt cheeks away, you should feel 2 little bony points in each butt cheek. Those are your sits bones. So those 4 points are where this group of muscles attaches. And they, in and around that, we have our anus, we have the anal opening, we have our vagina, we have our urethra, and the muscles are all sort of interwoven in 3 different layers in that space. And they play a sexual role. So the more superficial layer is more, or the more visible part, so more sexual wellness. The second layer is primarily responsible for those openings. So when we want stuff to stay inside of us, such as our pee and our poo and our farts, we want the muscles to be able to do that. But if we need something to come out, for instance, childbirth, or if we need to pee or poo, we want that to be able to be eliminated freely and properly. And then, from a sexual perspective, we also need those muscles to help allow something to come in, potentially with insert of sex. And then the third layer is primarily responsible for supporting our internal organs. The 3 main ones would be our bladder, our uterus, and our rectum. And people with male anatomy also have a pelvis. They also have a pelvic floor. Theirs is slightly narrower and a bit higher, and they don't obviously have a vagina and they don't have a uterus. So because we can grow babies, because our pelvis is wider, we face additional challenges with that specific group of muscles. We have hormonal influences. We menstruate, we all go through menopause. Most of us, the majority of females, do become pregnant and give birth at some point in their life. And so those are the main reasons, but also sometimes the lifestyle and fitness activities that we pursue can also have an impact on our pelvic floor as well.
So impact meaning things get a little stretched and more lax, and depending how many kids you've had, or maybe even
more. We can have both. Like a lot of people interpret if they have incontinence, if they have organ prolapse, if they don't have as much sensation during sex, like if they feel like something is not working as well as it should, they interpret that as weakness. And a lot of people interpret weakness as laxity or stretched out. And that can be the case for some people. But another contributor to things like prolapse and incontinence and pain, especially pelvic pain, is overactivity, actually muscles that are too tight and non-relaxing. So we need a balance between the ability to relax and the ability to contract. So we don't want muscles that are too tight or overactive, and we don't want muscles that are too lax. We need to kind of have that Goldilocks zone, I guess you would say. And so behaviors, sometimes if we are constantly holding our pelvis in a certain position based on our job or on the way that we sit or stand, that could potentially contribute to overactivity. If we, had multiple vaginal childbirths with a lot of tearing or potentially episiotomies, that could lead to scar tissue plus potentially some laxity. But then the other thing is, if people develop some sort of a challenge like incontinence or prolapse or even pain, we often become guarded. So if you feel like urine is going to leak out when you don't want it to, or if you're feeling vulnerable because you're like, I feel like one of my organs is, not where it should be, your muscle, like your natural response is to all of a sudden grip almost and kind of hold on and hope that it doesn't happen. So it can be a bit of a vicious cycle. And a lot of times people actually need to work more on the relaxation than they do on the actually activation in order to actually find their strength again.
Interesting. Okay. So incontinence is what exactly?
So there's urinary incontinence and there is what's termed anal or fecal incontinence. So urinary is where those are the ones we see and hear about the most, because there's lots of pad companies out there marketing to us, telling us that leaking is just part of being a woman, or it's, just put on this padded underwear and jump on the back of a motorcycle with a handsome man and you'll be fine, right? So we hear about that the most. And it's the one that most people, I would say, joke about. So people call it peasing or sneeze pee. And that's where there's stress urinary incontinence, where little bits of urine will leak out with some sort of exertion, whether it's exercise, whether it's a cough or a sneeze, sometimes even just standing up from a chair for some people. The muscles, the sphincters, can't close the opening either in time and or strongly enough to mitigate the pressures that are created. And so little bits of urine leak out. So that's super common, very, very treatable. You do not need to accept pads as your destiny. The other one is urge incontinence. And this is where people will say, my bladder just has a mind of its own. And all of a sudden I get this urge and I feel like I can't make it to the bathroom in time. And that's like an overwhelming, I'm racing, I'm crossing my legs, and sometimes I might leak a little, or I might have a complete release of my bladder. And that's urgency or urge incontinence. You can have a combination of the two, which is also very common. You can have people will say, well, I feel like I go to the bathroom all the time. And there is a medical condition called overactive bladder. And a lot of people will self-diagnose themselves as having overactive bladder because they go to the bathroom all the time. But it can actually be more behavioral, and people almost create overactivity because of their compensatory strategies. So if they feel like they're going to leak, then they're saying, okay, well, I'm going to pee before I go to my exercise class so I don't leak. And then I'm going to pee partway through my exercise class so that I'm not going to leak just in case. And so the bladder starts to feel like it's like a muscle that can get trained. So it's like, oh, you want me to signal you when you're this full as opposed to this full. Got it. So then it develops those habits or patterns. And then pretty soon people are feeling like they need to go all the time. So that's super common. And then we have anal incontinence. So that's where gas or stool would leak out for similar reasons. And obviously much more life altering if that's what you're dealing with. Thankfully, it's not as common, but it is something that can happen as well. So you can have the two types.
Okay. And these are all things that are easily treatable with work and time and knowing the right routines. Exactly. And it's not just Kegels, right? It's not just.
No, that's like the Kegels play a role. We have evidence to show that Kegels absolutely can be effective. The challenge is that Kegels are kind of thrown out as, oh, just do your Kegels. And people interpret that that's really all that I can do is just, I have to do my Kegels. And we have research to show that most people do them incorrectly, not their fault, because no one's told them or evaluated their pelvic floor and see if they're doing it correctly. And also, again, when you go back to what I was saying before, that some people have overactivity, if that person then goes and does Kegels, especially if they're doing them correctly, if they are doing them correctly, they just add more tension, where really they need to work a little bit more on the relaxation. Not to say that they don't benefit from some Kegels, but they want to make sure that they're actually working on the relaxation, the letting go piece. And the other kind of, I think, missing piece of Kegels is when we can bring them into functional movement, I think they make them, it becomes more effective, because most people think of Kegels as something that, you've heard you're supposed to do them at every red light, or I do them while I'm watching TV, or, you're usually sitting in a static position, or I do them while I'm standing brushing my teeth. Again, better than nothing, especially if you're doing them correctly. But a lot of the times, especially with stress urinary incontinence, that leaking happens when you're moving, when you're doing your fitness activities, when you stand up from a chair, when you push a heavy door open, something is, so you're active. So I think that we benefit from training the pelvic floor in dynamic movement, not just in a static Kegel exercise.
Now, one of the topics that you recently touched on Instagram was the topic of the infamous hysterectomy. And I know that many women, it's just such an easy surgery that doctors will talk about for women who do have chronic bleeding, and women are often just, they just take it like, okay, I'm older now, and this is just what my lot in life is, and they're kind of sold us that the solution is a hysterectomy. Why, in your opinion, is this not accurate?
I think so. Hysterectomy can be life-changing for people. And, it can transform their lives. However, what I feel is missing is the information about the hormone disruption and the information about the pelvic health implications as a result of having a hysterectomy. And I think that there's, for instance, heavy bleeding, let's say. I don't believe every single person has been given all of the information about the other options to pursue to help address that heavy bleeding. So coming back to that root cause, why are you bleeding excessively? Have we determined, is it diet related? Is it hormone related? Is it, endometriosis or adenomyosis? Like, there's lots of different things. So have we determined that? And I don't think every single person has been given that opportunity. A lot of people I deal with who've had a hysterectomy will often say, had I known, maybe I would have made a different choice. Now, hindsight's 2020 and you never really know, but I think there's a lot of people that feel like they weren't provided all of the information that would allow them to make the best decision at that time. So that's one piece. So there's heavy bleeding that people might have it for. There's fibroids. There's prolapse. So that's where pelvic organ prolapse is, where the bladder, the uterus, and the rectum, the urethra and the intestines can also be part of that. But the three most common types of prolapse are bladder, uterus, rectum. When they shift out of their proper anatomical position, so in the case of the uterus, if it starts to kind of descend into the vagina from the top down, creates a bulge that in advanced stages, it can be a bulge right at or even out of the entrance of the vagina. And it is incredibly detrimental to mental health. It's a physical thing, but I find the mental health piece the biggest struggle. And I can speak from experience because I've experienced prolapse myself. But so a lot of people will be offered a hysterectomy to get rid of the prolapse. And yep, that could help. It could be one thing, but there are also other types of surgery that could keep the uterus and suspend it. When the uterus is taken out, the uterus is I kind of call it like a keystone organ. And when it's not there anymore, it plays a role in helping keep the vagina where it is. And it also has it creates a space now. If it's gone, there's a space that other things can sort of bulge into or descend into. And I don't think a lot of people are told about that. So, and especially when you look at post-op recovery, similar to postpartum recovery, most people get a 6-week green light. And now that they have these bothersome symptoms gone, they will often go back to really intense or, decently intense activity. It doesn't even have to be that intense, but if they haven't done the core restoration work and aren't managing their intra-abdominal pressure well, they can be at increased risk of other types of prolapse or even incontinence. There's scar tissue that remains after surgery, and scar tissue can sometimes interfere with muscle function, which again can contribute to some of the challenges. So I think that it is often offered, and I can speak to this too. I remember having, I had something called adenomyosis, where the uterine lining is abnormally thick and that starts to grow into the muscular wall, and it creates a lot of bleeding and a lot of inflammation, and it's very painful and similar to endometriosis, only I think to a bit lesser degree. And the only cure is having a hysterectomy.
Cure, right?
The cure, yeah. And I remember, on certain days I would be housebound for days. I couldn't, I would just be bleeding so heavily, and it would be so painful that there were days where I was thinking, I don't want this anymore. I'm done. not having kids anymore. I don't need it. However, I work in pelvic health. I know all the benefits to keeping the uterus, especially keeping your ovaries. And so I was really determined to not go down that route. And thankfully, I was able to, I would say, put that into remission based on lifestyle changes that I made. So I think if those were offered to people ahead of time, I think we would see a great reduction in the number of hysterectomies that are done.
Right. No, I completely agree. I think those are huge points. And, there are obviously other things to be looking at with heavy bleeding as an example. And so you mentioned a few of them: diet, like nutrition, exercise, hormones, probably stress, maybe alcohol.
My personal experience was many years, most of my 40s, dealing with murder scene periods and a bunch of other things that I can look at and say, okay, part of it was perimenopause. So heart palpitations, I had weird rashes, I had high cholesterol, I had high blood pressure, constipation. I had all these things that, again, we can look at and say, okay, those are somewhat common in perimenopause. And for me, it actually was autoimmune related. And it was like this series of steps that I was taking and reading all these hormone books and kind of always taking quizzes and finding like I was in this hypothyroidism category. And finally, I read more about hypothyroidism and then saw Hashimoto's and recognized that hypothyroidism is so common in women. And the majority of women with hypothyroidism actually have Hashimoto's, which is not an autoimmune condition, but nobody's screening for it. Right. And so once I realized that, then it came down to reducing inflammation in my body. So that was diet. Gluten, dairy were removed. I took a food sensitivity test, removed that. I went on to bioidentical hormones. I was using Chinese medicine. I eliminated caffeine. So it was like this gradual step-by-step process. And the one that made the biggest difference was actually the last thing I did, which was remove alcohol. And it's not because I'm a big fan of alcohol. I just felt like, well, I just have like maybe 1 or 2 glasses of red wine a week. It can't be that bad. And once that was totally gone, there was a series of steps before that, but alcohol made a big difference for me. So while I'm not a hormone practitioner, I can offer people the guidance as to who else can support them in their health journey. And then I can help them address the pelvic health struggles particularly.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, I have had a very similar story in the sense that I had heavy cycles every month for years, like well over a decade, like you couldn't leave the house. And I went to and started investigating the hysterectomy piece and literally left with an appointment. And it was not a difficult process. They asked me a couple questions and I went home. I went to Indigo on the way home and bought a book on hysterectomy. And then I bought a couple other books on hormone health. I bought Suzanne Summers' book on Breakthrough, this book. Like it was my Bible for years, and it started me on my health journey. And then I kind of started doing exactly what you did, and I was able to get on bioidentical progesterone, which totally changed my whole world, and canceled that hysterectomy appointment. And that's, I don't know, at least 5 years ago now. Because it's just like you said, it doesn't have to be the only option. For some women, it is the option. But there is other things that you need to kind of investigate. And I am a believer that our body speaks to us. Yeah. And you kind of you have that cup of coffee and maybe your body's like, I don't know, this is what your body needs. Or you have that glass of wine, or you're going out for dinner party and you're, looking forward to seeing everyone, but your body's kind of saying, I'm not feeling good about the drinking tonight. I think those are like little signs and signals that we need to start listening to and try. And maybe that's that missing piece, like you mentioned.
Yeah. It's so interesting. And I'm, so happy that you did that. Cause I think the other piece is, while you're in the moment, it can be very difficult to think about trying other things, and that it will take a bit of time, and not everybody is committed to taking that time. And I get it. It can be costly, for one, to find the right practitioner. It can be costly with supplements and changing your whole diet. And, it's hard. I'm not saying that it's easy to do. But people who do go through it, even if at the end of it, they still choose the hysterectomy, or any surgery really, for that matter, all the steps that they have taken have
Right.
put their body in a better position to go through
Right.
a surgery. So I think that that's another piece to address, is that it's, surgery is a big deal. And even, they can say it's the laparoscopic, minimally invasive. Okay, you can use that term, fine. It's the incision's a little smaller, but you have multiple ones of those. It's still a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
It's still a disruption to your tissues and to your function and to your body. All the steps that you do ahead of time really optimize you to go through that process if that's what you choose in the end.
Yeah, you're right. You're losing a body part. So you want to just do as much work as you can, either leading up to it or to avoid it, whatever the outcome might be. But the whole health and wellness piece is such a contributor to how well you recover as well at the end of that.
And the other piece on that too, that I think is important for people to know, and why, even if, so when you have a hysterectomy, there's different types. Are you just getting the uterus out? Are you getting the fallopian tubes and the ovaries, or one ovary, or both? Or, there's lots of choices in the process of having a hysterectomy, different modes of surgery, different types of removal of, what is actually being removed. And anybody, even if it's just the uterus, I still recommend that you work with a hormone practitioner, because there are some people that are showing that usually within the first 5 years after just removing the uterus, the hormones are not working as well as they should. And we don't quite understand why.
Yeah.
And then also to know the people that do take their ovaries out, we know that there's a huge cognitive side to consider. So there's research to support in premenopausal women who remove their ovaries, they have an increased risk of cognitive impairment and longevity. So I think that, make sure you do your research about that side as well.
Yeah. Now, I did want to clarify that we're not talking about synthetic hormones. We're talking about bioidentical hormones. And so for anybody interested, make sure you do your homework with that. Look for functional medicine doctors. And my understanding is, and based on my own research and meeting with different doctors, is that bioidentical hormones are chemically similar to the hormones our own body produces. So our body doesn't differentiate the same way that they do with the synthetic hormone, because they're made from more natural ingredients like yams and soy and whatnot. So just wanted to throw that out there, that it's a piece of the puzzle potentially for some women. So Kim, you've written a number of books, and you also have an app called the Buff Muff. What does this app help us do?
Yeah, the app is my most recent kind of addition to my lineup of things, but I wanted it to be more, again, whole body approach. I believe that we need more than just squeeze and release. And so the app was a place to go that had free information for people, and there was enough free information that people could get started on my approach, which is learn to connect with your pelvic floor, understand the importance of posture and alignment, like how we hold ourselves in space, and then how we can incorporate pelvic floor into movement. So it gives people the fundamentals. And then from there, if they want more, then in the paid version, there's whole body workouts with me. There's nutrition and meal plans. There's guest experts with doctors, physiotherapists, nurse continence advisors, other pelvic health professionals to also present that we really truly benefit from having a village for our health. Just a family doctor, I don't feel, is necessarily serving us. They are a member on that team, but we have a whole bunch of other people that can also play a role. So I wanted to introduce people to all these other practitioners so that they can either work with them if they happen to be in that city, or find somebody like them, depending on where they live in the world.
Oh, I love that. I'm a huge proponent for that. The more people on your team, the better. We need all the support we can get. So it has been such a pleasure talking with you today. I love watching your Instagram videos with you in your yoga pants, in the skeletal yoga pants. Those are super cute. But yeah, I love all the different ways that you suggested we can keep our pelvic floors happy and healthy. And I think so many women need to hear this information, that they know that there's other options, and to advocate for yourself and empower yourself and do your research. So thank you for continuing to share your message and share hope with so many.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I guess one last thing I just want to say is for anybody who doesn't feel like their pelvic health is as optimal as it could, that the number one thing that I recommend for everybody is to see a pelvic floor physical therapist. I think that just like going to the dentist once a year to manage our oral health, we go from a preventive maintenance perspective, we go if we have no toothache. I think we should be doing the same thing with our pelvic health. So see a pelvic floor physical therapist once a year, check in, even if you have no symptoms, but go, especially if you do.
I think that's great. That's a great suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.